I learned my students, you Broward people are bougie. You never go to Miami. I learned that this morning. Okay, so first of all, want to definitely say that on behalf of Dr. Michael Hurlburt and the ACHD pathway and myself and the SBSHS pathway, we're really happy to have you here. Also, I want for you to know that fortunately, because of our esteemed social media coordinator, everything guru, Ed Luna, we have also on Facebook, Broward College South Campus Facebook, not only is a flyer for this event posted, but you also can make comments about your thoughts on DACA. Myself and my students, we did a great thing earlier this semester where we just really captured images as well as words about how they felt about DACA, and so we want you to do the same thing today as well. So feel free to go on the BC South Campus's Facebook page, do some comments about DACA, how do you feel about DACA, and then just make sure you put hashtag BC hashtag DACA or hashtag BC DACA. That would be great. Now we can really get it started, right? So I want to bring in my compadre, my homie, my partner in this academic thing. He and I have done this several times and we're excited to do it again today. He is a philosophy and ethics professor. He has a wonderful sneaker collection. He is a tremendous Miami Heat fan and a really cool dude. So please pretend like he's Drake, like give him a lot of energy. Give it up for Dr. Michael Hurlburt.
Thank you very much. I don't know how much about the cool part, but everything else he said is correct. All right, so my plan for today is to go through a handful of the core facts concerning DACA. Then I will tell you the major reasons why people take either side of this debate. Should the folks protected by DACA be allowed to stay, or should we give them the boot? Then I will talk about some anticipated results of what would likely happen, what we can reasonably predict would take place if DACA were to end. But I'm not really going to be sharing my beliefs or my opinions. So when we go over the different sides, these are beliefs that various folks hold. And then we hope, Rudy and I, that after our presentations today, we'll hear from you and you'll be able to assess how strong are these positions, which side seems to be right in your mind. All right, so DACA is the acronym for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And it's a mouthful, but it really boils down to a fact. A lot of folks come to America and they don't do so legally. Many of them bring children along, and those kids have been raised here, and those kids remain here. What should we do with them? So a number of years ago, one of our presidents put DACA in place, and it was meant to protect those people who arrived as children and who have remained here. In order to qualify for DACA, applicants had to jump through some hoops. They had to be brought here while they were young, they had to remain here, they had to apply and pay a fee of $495. They went through biometric screening, which involved fingerprints, photo ID, their pictures were taken, and they obtained their signature. And in order to remain here and to qualify, they have to be productive and safe. And the way that we determine that is folks are required to remain in school if they're still young, or graduate high school, or if they've served in the military, that qualifies. And they've got to be contributing members to society who aren't dangerous. So background checks are performed, and we make sure that they haven't engaged in serious crimes. Now, what does someone get when they receive DACA protection? A big deal. They're allowed to stay here and do their thing as they see fit without fear of deportation. So rather than worrying about being caught or removed from the country, they can go to school, they can work, they can change jobs. Whenever they apply for school or work or whatever it is that they pursue, they get to do their thing, and their residency or immigration status isn't going to be a hurdle. It's not going to help them or hurt them. It's no longer an issue. That benefit is kind of brief to explain, but here are some of the ways that people say we should allow DACA to continue. Surprisingly, both sides of the debate start with fairness. People who are for DACA protection say that it would be horribly unfair to punish people who've done nothing wrong. The kids who have been brought here were brought here. They didn't decide to enter the country. They didn't even really decide to stay, but they're here. They're here as the result of the actions of their parents. And if their parents broke the law, they could possibly be punished, but it wouldn't be appropriate to punish children for the misdeeds of their parents. So a lot of folks think that the breaking from DACA or ending it would be horribly rude and severe punishment for people who are innocent to begin with. Another thing involves the consequences. If DACA were to end, it would really be rotten for the DACA participants, their families, their communities, and our economy. The individuals would have to change every aspect of their life. Right now, they're able to flourish however they see fit, but if they were to lose their protection from DACA, they'd have to go into kind of hiding mode and hope primarily not to be detected, not to be caught, because it could harm them and it could harm their families. Their families could be caught, their families could be removed. The communities would suffer to a degree because a lot of folks don't do their thing in isolation, they do things with others, and they help and participate and contribute within the community. But they also spend money, right? So anytime we spend money, we're boosting the economy. When I go buy something, like a pair of sneakers, somebody at Foot Locker is getting some hours, and then they're gonna get paid. And they might go to Chipotle, and somebody making a burrito is getting some hours, and they're gonna get paid. So the economic activity is quite great when we're out and able to earn money and make wages, and ending DACA protection for over 700,000 people would dampen all of that for all of us, but it would also make things significantly worse for these folks individually. Other reasons are tied to fairness as well. The people who signed up to participate in DACA came forward. They approached our government, they gave them their names, they gave them the names of their family members, and they followed all of our rules. They jumped through our hoops, and our government made assurances to them. And it seems like it's horribly unfair to many people to yank that protection away. These folks have put themselves in harm's way by giving the government evidence of their undocumented status and evidence of the undocumented status of their family members and parents. And then the last example involves trust that we ought to have, or should have, or do have, ideally in our government. If our government changes its policy toward people after we've made an agreement, lots of different kinds of folks, not just the DACA recipients, would have great reason to be distrustful. They could worry that things will change depending upon who we elect as president. They might be distrustful to go forward to the police if they've been victimized in a crime. They might begin to fear being removed or having their family members removed. They might not participate in the census. The census isn't the most exciting thing, but it happens about every 10 years. It's about to happen soon. And the census allows us as a country to figure out how many people are here. And the number of people that we have in different areas determines how we provide services, like schools and other things along those lines. And so if a community is distrustful of the government and its many branches, that can cause a lot of problems to pop up across the board. So those are the major reasons why a lot of folks think that DACA should remain in place and that these 700-ish thousand people should remain protected. The other side of the debate is also based on fairness. People who are here illegally are here illegally. Laws have been broken. Our United States immigration laws have been violated. And it would be unfair to let people benefit from crimes that have been committed. DACA protection protects people, according to this side of the debate, from unlawful activity. Usually, if we break the law, we face negative consequences. We might be punished. But DACA protection allows people to avoid punishment for laws that have been broken. So it just doesn't seem fair for crime to be allowed to pay for hundreds of thousands of people. Another one involves future consequences. Rules are in place to act as a deterrent. If you get caught doing something bad, you could suffer. So if you don't wish to suffer, you've got a really strong reason not to go break the law. This flips that around. Instead, we'd be sending a message to people from all around the world that if you come here illegally, it could really be good for your kids. You probably won't get caught and get deported. We have roughly 12 million-ish people here as undocumented immigrants, and we can't snap them up and remove them all, so most of the folks remain here. And if we allow DACA to stay in place, we're letting people know that depending upon whom we select as president, somebody might just up and sign a new bill, or I'm sorry, put a new policy into place, and your children could be allowed to live in America without fear of being removed. So we'd be sending the message that your crime could pay, and it can pay for your kids. The further reasons are also based on fairness. We've got rules in place that tell folks from all around the world, if you wish to come here and enjoy the great things that we've got in America, you've got to follow our rules. And people from all around the world jump through our hoops and they apply to get here legally. They wait to get here legally. They wait to bring their family members here. And by keeping DACA in place, we're prioritizing lawbreakers over law-abiding citizens from around the world who wish to come here legally. And this is a newer reason why a lot of people have been vocally against DACA. This is something that's come up really recently, as recently as, I don't know what Trump tweeted this morning, but at least on Monday, you might have heard the term chain migration. It's a scary and mean-sounding term to some people because a lot of people were brought here as immigrants in chains. That's not the technical initial origin of the story. When people talk about chain migration, they normally have in mind something like a causal chain, where if one person comes to America, they can seek protective status for other family members. And it goes through a chain of events where more and more people will be eventually granted legal standing, and that's something a lot of people oppose. All right, so this was recent as of Monday. A number of people in South America every year move north, and they come to the American border, and they hope to be granted asylum. They hope to make their case to be allowed to enter America, to receive protection, and to stay here. And the president, I believe, heard about that and claimed that a lot of these people are trying to take advantage of DACA. They've heard about DACA and they want to get in on that, and that's why they're all racing up here right now. And for that reason, we need to make sure that DACA isn't allowed to go forward. No more DACA deal. All right, here are some of the facts involving what's happening with DACA and what people think about those facts. On your left, you'll see the age breakdown of folks participating in DACA. Most of these people were young when they were brought here, and they're still pretty young. When it comes to what most Americans believe, most folks think that they should be allowed to stay. It's an overwhelming majority. 87% of all people polled think that DACA recipients should be allowed to continue to stay here. And this majority holds up in both political parties. 92% of Democrats and 79% of Republicans believe that DACA participants should be permitted to stay. And here are some charts. All right, so many people claim that immigrants are more dangerous than native-born Americans, that with more immigrants coming in, we're going to have more crime because various countries are not sending us their best. The data shows that those claims are false. On the left, we see numbers tied to overall immigration and overall violent crime. And if immigrants were more dangerous, the more immigrants we have here, we would expect violent crime to go up. The opposite has taken place. So as immigration numbers have gone up steadily over the last 20 or 30 years, luckily violent crime numbers have gone down. Now the one on the right shows that there's not really a great relationship or a strong relationship between the number of immigrants and violent crimes in a community. It turns out a lot of places that have far more immigrants have far less crime. So the bottom right corner, on the bottom right corner showing places like New York and Miami, these are cities that have tons and tons and tons of immigrants, but they also have far lower crime. We've got very few places that have fewer immigrants. I'm sorry, we have many places that have more immigrants and less crime. And what might we expect? Like, this is a prediction. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. But if DACA protection were to end, people who are currently protected by it would no longer be protected. And so here are some of the things that we should expect. Right off the bat, their lives would change. They would have to primarily focus on detection avoidance. So rather than prospering and thriving and drawing attention to themselves for doing well, they need to keep things on the DL. They would no longer be able to work in the same places. They might not be able to go to school or accept the same sorts of scholarships. I don't know how many of you have seen these sorts of things on IG right now, but people are getting letters or emails from colleges when they get accepted. And have you seen these videos where someone gets into Princeton? And so people go buck wild, right? They're very, very excited. They achieved academic excellence, and they've been rewarded by getting into a great school. Well, people don't want to draw attention to themselves if they can be removed. And so a lot of people will settle for doing less well because they don't want to be detected. They don't want to be removed, and they don't want their family members to be removed. So educationally and professionally, their lives would suffer immediately. And the economy would suffer, and government tax receipts would suffer as well. Because fewer people would be working legally, they wouldn't have their employers paying taxes on their wages, they would not be paying taxes on their wages, and because they're working under the table, their checks would be a lot smaller, so they'd be spending fewer dollars in our community, so overall total economic output would also suffer. That's it for what I'm going to discuss right now. Professor Jean-Bart's going to come up now to talk about historical aspects of DACA and the DREAM Act. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Just waiting. Yeah. It's very nice and air conditioned here. Okay, here we go. Let me test your hip hop skills. Which rapper came up with the song Dreams and Nightmares? Okay, y'all know your stuff, right? So I think it's interesting, and I purposely entitled this presentation that. I also think it's interesting that we're doing this on the 50th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King. And we know that Martin Luther King's most famous speech is the I Have a Dream speech, right? So like things are really a matter of perspective. Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? For some people, it's a dream, but for some other people, it's essentially a nightmare. So before we even understand how DACA came into being, you must understand that there was a DREAM Act, right? That was proposed in 2001 by Senators Dick Durbin and Orrin Hatch. So DREAM Act stands for Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act. And it's 2001. It's really pretty much simple, and it really kind of foreshadows the coming of DACA. The idea is that those who are children of illegal immigrants should given a chance to have or become citizens. But however, there were stipulations involved, right? So as echoed before, they had to arrive before they were 16 years old. They had to have continuously lived in America for at least 5 years. They had to have obtained a high school diploma or a GED. They had to display good moral character, and they also had to pass a background check. And then ideally, what the DREAM Act would have done is, if they had applied to that and been a recipient of that, then they had to live for an additional 6 years, right? And they had to have attended a post-secondary college or at least served in the military for a couple of years or been a recipient of an honorable discharge. One of the things I think is an interesting conversation, and there's a lot of conversations that we don't have about DACA that we really should have about DACA, is one, the value of education, right? The notion to suggest almost that education can equal or suggest good behavior, right? That in other words, you are bringing something of value to America. Some may see this as a good thing, some may see this as a prejudicial thing, right? What if someone goes to high school but doesn't continuing their education at college? What if they didn't serve in the military? Are they not good? Do they not serve essentially America in some purpose, in some form or capacity, right? That's a conversation that's often not had. But if you were to be a recipient of the DREAM Act, that's what you would have to do. Then you would again have to prove that you had good moral character, and then you again had to go through an additional background check. However, the DREAM Act is not going to be passed. So even in 2010, when there's a revised version, it passes the House, but it does not pass the Senate. And then we're going to enter into a fray of some controversy. Why is that? Well, in the US Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, it makes it really clear. The legislative body is Congress. Congress is the one that ought to be the ones making laws. And because Congress ought to be the one making laws, then there are individuals who feel a certain way about a president when they essentially execute an executive order, right? So the question becomes, is it or is it not constitutional? Now, it should be stated that every single president since George Washington has executed some form of an executive order. So here's the situation, right? These immigrant children who are, or the children of these illegal immigrants, the thought is, well, maybe they should have a pathway towards citizenship, but Congress does not think so, at least on the side of the Senate, it is not passed. So now the question becomes, well, what is going to be done? Is it going to therefore cause for the children of these illegal immigrants to not have a path towards citizenship? Or is the president going to do something? So now enter in President Barack Obama. President Barack Obama is going to therefore do an executive order 2012, and it's going to be recognized as DACA, right? Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And so what we have on the screen is a quote from President Trump. So President Trump essentially states that even President Obama himself knew that he didn't have the power to do what he did, right? Again, it goes back to whether or not this particular executive order is constitutional. Did President Obama indeed have the right to go and say, well, because Congress did not pass the DREAM Act, and because I personally believe that these children deserve a path towards citizenship, I'm going to create DACA. But the question becomes, well, did he believe that he didn't have the power to do it? In other words, did he have the mindset of, you know what, I'm kind of like a king, I know I don't have the right to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So what we find is that Obama did not necessarily say that pretty much at all, right? However, he does indicate and admits that this is not ideal, right? Like DACA is not something that he necessarily desired to do on a regular basis, but only did so because Congress was not essentially acting, right? Now this is not new for there to be discontent between the president and also Congress. This is really throughout history. Harry Truman comes to mind. But we also know that really during the presidency of Obama, there was legitimate discontent that was going on, right? So Obama essentially indicates this is only a temporary fix until eventually, ideally, Congress actually passes legislation that is going to give these children a path towards citizenship. Of course, we know that that is not going to be the case for years, and still is not the case as far as there being legislation passed. Here's the thing that I think is really interesting. Obama is recognized as the deporter-in-chief. So if I were to say to you, you know, when you think of deportations, who do you think of? You may think Donald Trump because of rhetoric. You may even think of George W. Bush. Yet the truth of the matter is that Obama deported a whole lot of people, right? And so those who are part of Latin groups know this to be the case. What is interesting though is, well, why is Obama, who deported under his administration at least, deported a lot of people? Why would he essentially enact DACA? Some would speculate that he did so in order to gain votes. And we'll talk about that momentarily as how that applies to Trump as well, right? So for example, I was sharing with my students this morning that Texas is seen as a Republican state. The governor is Republican. Many of the congressional members are Republican. Many of the people they elect are Republican. They've been electing Republican presidents for a very long time. However, the data shows that the majority of registered voters in Texas are actually Democrats, right? The truth of the matter is, though, that many of the people who are Democrats are not voting in these elections. Texas is a majority-minority state. We know that minorities typically, not always, but typically vote for Democrats. So some speculate the reason why Obama did this is really so he can gain Latin voters and not essentially alienate them. It is not an accident that when he comes out on June 15th, 2012 and announces DACA, that it is an election year, right? But is Obama really the deporter-in-chief? So here is some interesting data, right? Take a look at this graphic. What you'll notice in this particular graphic is that total deportations under Bill Clinton was actually more than Bush and Obama. But it's all dependent upon how do you define deportations. So for the Bush administration and the Clinton administration, they said that if you were also removed and returned, that essentially requires to suggest that you were deported. The Obama administration does not do that. All the Obama administration does is says, well, if you were removed, then we'll recognize it as a deportation, but not if you were returned. So now the question becomes, well, what is the difference, right? So like imagine now you are going and you are leaving Mexico, You're trying to cross the border, you are caught at the border, and then the ICE agent or the Border Patrol agent essentially says, okay, you can't go here legally, I'm just going to return you to Mexico, right? Now, the thing you gotta understand about that is, if I am an immigrant, regardless of if I'm Mexico or not, because what you need to know is, everyone that comes from Mexico going to America is not Mexican, right? If I'm an immigrant and I'm leaving Mexico and I'm going to America and the border agent stops me and says, okay, you gotta return, I can eventually, if I'm able to do so legally, go back and try to go into America with really no issue as far as there being a time limit. However, if I am removed, meaning I have passed the border somehow, some way, I'm living in America illegally, if I am removed, I am not allowed to apply for any visa for several years. So what we find is under Clinton and Bush, there were a lot more returns. People are getting stopped at the border and they're being returned. Under Obama, there are a lot less returns and there are a lot less apprehensions. However, a lot more people are being removed. In other words, a lot more people are being taken from America and being sent back to Mexico. This is the reason why he's recognized as the Porter-in-Chief. However, this is the key number I want you to take a look at. Total apprehensions, right? So you gotta understand that what we were facing in the 90s is a heightened sense of people leaving Mexico and coming to America. So America did something about it. They created policy to essentially create more representation on the borders. Now, one of the things that Trump recently said is, well, I'm going to have the military guard the border, right? And people feel a different kind of way about that. Truth of the matter is that's not technically new. Under Clinton and under Bush, and under Obama, you had National Guards at different periods of time guarding the border. But the question really becomes, why is there a lot less apprehension, right? So here's what we do know though. In 1999, 5.5% of Mexican men would try to go from Mexico to America. Another way of putting it is 55 out of every 1,000 Mexican men were going or trying to go to America and cross the border. It's a pretty sizable population. However, what we do know is because of heightened security, because of policy, but also mainly because of the fact that America was going through a recession and Mexico's economy was actually recovering, a lot less Mexicans were actually coming in. So in 2010, what we find is that 0.9% of Mexican men attempted to enter the US during that time. Here's another way of looking at it. Out of every 1,000 Mexican men in 2010, only 9 of them tried to go and cross the border in America. My question to you is the following. Based upon Trump's rhetoric, do you find that number to be a little bit surprising? Y'all really quiet. I'm gonna ask the question again. Based on Trump's rhetoric, right? The notion of let us build a wall. Let me ask you a different question. Isn't it fair to say that it would suggest that we have an immigration problem? Okay. Yes, correct? But do the numbers bear that out? No. So in other words, when Trump was talking about let's build a wall, there were actually less Mexicans coming in than actually during the Bush era. Let's put it another way. The last time we saw numbers this low was the 1960s. The question becomes, well then why would he do that? So I'm gonna ask you that question. Why did Trump make the wall an issue if, some would argue based upon statistics, it really wasn't that big of an issue? Why did he do it? Votes. The question becomes, well, what would his platform be otherwise, right? And was it really effective? So one of the things I thought was really interesting is that when Trump begins leading the Republican nomination race, it's like really early on, and he maintains it, like he doesn't lose. Now typically, in the last several decades, when someone got the lead that early, they eventually would lose, but he did not lose, right? He did speak the language of the working class individual, in particular white working class. We know that the majority of whites voted for Trump in every single category. Wealthy whites voted for Trump. White women voted for Trump. Poor whites voted for Trump. Middle class whites voted for Trump. College educated whites voted for Trump. Non-college educated whites voted for Trump. However, what we also know is that the thing that made him have a splash is the talk of there being a border wall, and therefore people feeling as though there actually is a Mexican issue. Now, there's some other things we gotta consider. This used to be Mexico. That looks like the size of America at that time, does it not? So now all of this was Mexico, and then here we have the Mexican-American War. If you notice this portion right here, all of this portion right there is modern-day America, right? The irony is this, that the majority of Mexicans live in states that used to actually be Mexico. So now what we find is the following. There's a history here, right? There's a history in regards to the relationship between America and Mexico and how we view Mexicans, right? Let me give you a random one before I even get to this one. And Dr. Hurlburt and I did this presentation before. We did a presentation on weed a couple of years ago, right? And so one of the things that we were discussing is the following, okay? I want you to think about this. How many of you in here smoke weed? Just joking, don't do that. Some of y'all was so close though. Some of y'all forgot where you were, snitching on your own self. Think about it for a moment. Very few of you actually smoke weed, right? Wink, wink. This is what I want you to imagine. If by accident one time you slipped up and fell on a blunt, one time in your life, I want you to compare the feeling you feel in comparison to if by accident one time in your life you were drunk. You know that your actions are more dangerous when you are intoxicated on alcohol than when you are essentially intoxicated on weed. Is that a fair statement? We know that many people die essentially from alcoholism in regards to DUIs. One particular year, about 26,000 people died due to alcohol consumption. Maybe they were the victim of drunk driving, or maybe they overconsumed alcohol, whatever the case may be. That same year, 0 people died from weed, right? You've never been to a funeral, and your homeboy's like, man, what did him? Yo, man, that weed, man, that kush was strong. Like, you've never done that before. The question becomes, well, why would weed become illegal, right? Those of you who are my students, you kind of know the story, right? Part of it is literally Harry Anslinger telling Congress that weed makes white women want to have sex with black men. And Congress says, that's horrible. Let's make it illegal. The other part, though, also was that weed was seen as a Mexican drug. That Mexicans are the ones that use weed. That Mexicans are the ones that essentially transport weed to America. And what we essentially find is that there is a bias towards many Mexicans. We know this to be the case because, for example, there is the issue of repatriation. Before that, there was the issue of mob violence. So, for example, in the gold rush era in California, there was only one person that has been documented to be hung in the gold rush. She was a Mexican woman. There was a 14-year-old who essentially was killed by a mob who was Mexican, right? Like, so the mob are often, and by the mob, I don't mean the mafia, I mean like a group of people, right? White Americans would often literally attack Mexicans and often kill them in public with there being no recourse. We also know, however, that there is a symbiotic relationship, if you will, between the economy and immigration. The better our pockets are, typically the more tolerant a little bit we are about immigration. The worse our pockets are, then the less tolerant we are, right? So what we know is that Trump kind of took advantage of a post-recession economy that is still not fully recovered, in particular for people of the working class. So when Trump said, essentially, we gotta build a wall to keep these little illegal immigrants from coming in because they're a threat to the jobs, those who are working class, people thought to themselves, yes, they take money out of our pockets. Even though statistically speaking, we know that is not necessarily accurate. So what do we find? Mexicans were doing migrant work. However, the Great Depression comes. When the Great Depression comes, the thought is, well, we need more jobs. So then all of a sudden, about 2 million Mexicans are going to be repatriated, is what they call it, where they're going to be forcibly removed from America and sent back to Mexico, okay? Some of them, of course, 60% of them actually, being Mexican Americans. In other words, many of the agents were not saying, hey, are you an American or are you Mexican, right? Like, it's very reminiscent of the Japanese internment camps. Many Japanese Americans actually found themselves in horse stables and in internment camps. So there's repatriation. The issue is, though, post or during World War II, where the economy is beginning to recover, now we again need migrants to work in the fields. So now you have the Bracero programs, right? The notion is, yo, we gotta bring in these Mexicans back from Mexico to work the fields. So they do that. But then it's post-World War II. The economy again is recovering, becoming stronger, and then you're going to have what is deemed as Operation Wetback. Operation Wetback essentially takes over, potentially some estimates say, over 1 million Mexicans and have them to go back. Now this is the thing you gotta understand. In many of these instances, the way the Mexicans were treated was extremely inhumane. They'll be left in the desert, sometimes 15 miles away from the Mexican border, and many of them essentially would die. Here is a question that we have to essentially grapple with, and that is this. When we're talking about there being enthusiasm for the border wall for some people beyond DACA, is it really rooted in these immigrants being a threat to America, or is it really rooted in prejudice? I now bring to the stage my colleague as well, and so now we're going to allow you to ask us questions about DACA, immigration, and the like. Thank you so much. Any questions? Thank you. Do you have any questions? Somebody? Anybody? I mean, I know we did a thorough job, but yes, Casey.
I've heard that if your age, it's much easier to get in this country. I guess what I'm asking is true. It's much easier to get in this country if you're a British person as opposed to a person who actually needs to get in this country.
I don't have a great answer for that. Immigration policy and law is really, really complicated. There are a lot of different factors that go into whom we allow to enter. Country of origin, education, income. In some cases, people get preferential treatment when they spend certain dollar amounts here. So in some cases, yes. But in general, I'm not sure.
I will echo that thought, but also from a personal standpoint of being of Haitian origin. Typically speaking, it's tougher, right? It is not just economics, but some would also argue there's some racial component, right? So one of the things that was really interesting is when President Trump called African nations, Haiti and El Salvador, loophole countries. One of the comments that he was reported to have also said is, why can't we have more people like Norwegians, right? So there is a racial element. Sometimes we conflate race with economics. So there are poor white people, there are poor Europeans. And so the question is, well, is it more difficult? In some context it is, because these visa applications cost money. So like in a very real way, right? Like if you cannot afford to do it, then it gives you an incentive if you're desperately trying to go to America to find other means to do so. But to his point, it does vary, right? Each case is different. If you are a wealthy person from Haiti, your ability to enter into the country can definitely depend, but typically is easier than someone who's poor. But it doesn't mean that you also won't face with some of the hurdles that those who are impoverished will as well. I think I saw another hand. Yes.
My question was, how many of the young immigrant children that get deported later on actually speak the language of the country they get deported?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. So here's what I will say, and then definitely chime in as well. I was reading somewhere that there's about 54 million Latinx people in America, right? 43 million people speak Spanish. So I'm not an expert at math, but I have some interest in numbers. So just to make it easier, that's almost 25% don't speak English, right? I mean, don't speak Spanish, rather. Many of you are in that audience, right? You have been accused by your abuela of being, you know, what's the term I'm looking for? Maybe a gringo? Has anyone been called a gringo by their abuela? A little bit, right? Because the idea is you don't speak Spanish, right? If you're Haitian, and if you don't speak Creole, you know, it's like, où sont un blanc, right? Like the idea is like you're white, you don't speak Creole. So what you have is, and this is just really guesstimation, right? There isn't a hard number to directly say this amount of people are going to go or are unable to speak Spanish. What we do know, however, that there is still somewhat of a sizable population that don't know how to speak Spanish. And you bring up a really interesting point, right? Because when you have the TPS situation going on, where it's removed for Haitians, as well as El Salvadorians and some other groups as well, Liberian just the other day, many Liberians, because the English is spoken there, but if you're Haitian, for many of my Haitian American students, if they were to be sent to Haiti, they wouldn't know what to do, right? And I think that's a really important question that has to be considered. One interesting story was earlier this year, where a guy has a wife and 2 kids. His kids are born in America. His wife was born in America. He was born in Mexico, but came here since he was 9, and like literally is just really Americanized, and he was deported, right? And they're taken away from his children and his wife. So that's a real thing that definitely needs to be considered.
I don't know an exact percentage, but we have good reason to believe it's going to be a high number of people, because by design, DACA applies to people who were brought here when they were young. So they came up in America, presumably speaking English. They stayed here, continuing to speak English, and then if they were to be deported, it wouldn't really be planned, so it's not something they were able to prepare for. So they would be uprooted from the country that they've known the bulk of their lives, sent to another place of the world, probably without school, work, or housing plans in place. So that disruption is going to be gigantic. And there might be linguistic concerns as well if it's a country that doesn't primarily speak English.
Nice. You gotta say that. Can we put the presentation, which one, mine or his? Okay, can you put Dr. Hurlburt's presentation on, please, Scott? Thank you. So you have a question about a slide?
It was like, okay, it said, the statement, I guess the sense you were arguing was like, oh, it's unfair for legal immigrants who have like paid to come to the country. So DACA is unfair in that sense, but like, keep on. So again, yeah, so like you have this like white person right here saying immigrants are legal. So like, are there really like legal immigrants who are like protesting against DACA? That's my question. I don't know what that's like.
I mean, probably, right? Because there are all kinds of people that have all kinds of political beliefs. But when we do the polls, over 80% of the people say that the DACA participants, because many of them are not kids now. The average age, I believe, is 25, but that's still young folks. So most people, seemingly of all stripes, think that the people should be able to stay. So I presented this as a two-side debate, but merely in terms of popularity, one side is winning. That doesn't mean it's right, it doesn't mean it's a stronger argument, but more people are on the let them stay side than this side. And what I tried to do is present all of the reasons that I've seen given to show why it's not appropriate to allow people to stay. And we are a country of immigrants, we're a country built on immigration, our country's supposed to be all about immigration, but we want people to do it the right way. And so folks on this side of the debate are saying we need to preserve our laws and apply them consistently. And when people violate our ways that we think are just and appropriate, we shouldn't reward that. Now, even if that means rewarding their children. That's what folks on this side, many folks on this side say.
I'm gonna go here and then you, sir. So you got it, no problem.
So I'm looking at the Trump ended DACA, I believe it was Tuesday. When will the Congress decide whether we do or not?
IDK. We don't know, right? So this is a peculiar historic and political situation because as a rule, Congress will create laws and then eventually a president will sign them and then they go into law. But DACA was created and executed by one president And Trump, to my knowledge, hasn't officially ended it. He said that he would end it in 6 months. Those 6 months came up in early March, but then courts got involved. So right now, to my knowledge, it's still in place, and the presumption is eventually Congress will do something. But when, I don't know that any of us can accurately predict when Congress will agree on things and put them into law. And even if Congress does agree, will the president sign it? So right now, we don't know what's going to happen to these folks. On one of the earlier slides, the number of official participants, the folks who signed up and were approved, is around 700,000, but the number of people who could qualify but who did not apply is anywhere between 1 and 1.2 million. A lot of people weren't comfortable coming to the government and saying, hey, I'm breaking the law, here's my name and my family, right? So this could apply to well over 1 million people, and right now they don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen.
I think also to add on to that, one of the things that has to be stated is that this presidency operates really differently, and I mean that in a very objective way. And so, because there's an infusion of social media, right? And so, what's never happened before is firings and also potential policy decisions via Twitter, right? Like that's never happened. And the issue with that is it can be forever changing, right? So let me give you an example. I mentioned to you that he stated yesterday via Twitter, the military is going to be protecting the border. Members of the military and the Pentagon didn't know that till he tweeted it, right? That's different. So I say that to say, he says one thing one day, but then is known to also say something else. But because the policy rhetoric is through Twitter and not actual documentation, conversations, typical channels, we really don't know. Yes?
Alright, so a lot of people oppose DACA, a lot of them. And recently, people have been coming in from other countries, such as Eastern European countries like Ukraine and Russia and stuff. And my question is does DACA also apply to those immigrants too as well?
So here's the thing with DACA, right? DACA was time specific. This is the thing that people often miss out on. For you, if you come into the country illegally today, and you have a child today, it does not apply to you. DACA was enacted because it said, okay, for those who are in the past, you've been here before you were 16, you've been living here continuously for at least 5 years, you have an educational track, like you seem to be a productive citizen, then you essentially had to apply. And that's another thing that was missed out on, which is that you don't just wake up and be like, yo, I'm a DACA recipient. Right? Like there's a formal application process that costs money as well, right? And you have to prove a lot of things and then potentially be a recipient of DACA. So for those who are coming illegally today, it would not apply to them, right? You mentioned something about a lot of people don't support DACA. A lot of people do support it, right? Which is one of the messages that Dr. Hurlburt was saying. The thing though that has to be considered though, and again this goes back to potential classism prejudice is, well, what about the children who are not going to college, but who have been here before they were 16? What about them? And that's missed out in the conversation. So it's almost like the DACA recipients, in large part of the reason why both Republicans and Democrats, well, Democrats are given, but Republicans even support DACA, is because the notion is these immigrants have been proving themselves to not be a threat.
To get back to part of your question, if I understood it correctly. So as he pointed out, people who are wanting to come here now, they cannot qualify for DACA. Like there is a specific time frame. And if Congress were to go forward and make some sort of law, we don't know exactly what dates they would use, but we have very good reason to believe they'd be from 10 years ago, 5 years ago. The window is really far in the past. So there aren't new people waiting to hop in and get in on the DACA deal. But you mentioned specific countries. Over a quarter of the DACA recipients came from Mexico, but they're DACA recipients from all over the world. So people from South Korea, India, various European countries, all over the place. So there are people from all over the world who are currently wondering what's going to happen with their status. And when it comes to that sort of thing, that sort of uncertainty, like I'm here and I'm safe. Like I've got a place where I live. I got a apartment that I rent, so I got a lease, I got a job, I have a steady paycheck. None of that is in play, but if that security were to be removed, that would be really scary, right? So one of the things that I've been hearing a lot about recently is people who go to medical school. Like, that's awesome. If you earn your way into medical school, that's a terrific accomplishment, and it sets you up for a career for your whole life. But it is expensive. So like, if you're one of these DACA folks and you don't know what's gonna happen, and you get into medical school, are you willing to borrow tens of thousands of dollars for medical school if you could get yanked away in 6 months? It's a very dangerous decision, right? What happens if you want to go buy a house? Or even if you just want to sign like a 2-year lease, if you want to buy a car, lease a car. These are decisions that you might not make because you don't know if you'll be allowed to stay here, to stay in that apartment, to drive that car, to attend that medical school.
Other questions? Mariana, and then Lisa.
If Trump were to what would happen? Like, what really happening? They just
That's excellent question, right? So this is from my understanding, and then definitely jump in. So what people often miss out on, and I go back to Obama talking about this is not a temporary fix, is that there was time limits. So like, you have to reapply consistently, right? So if you're currently a recipient of DACA, because that might potentially be honored, the question becomes, when it expires, then what will happen? And then potentially what could potentially happen naturally is deportation and removal. The thing to look at though is, will the removal, if there is removal, be humane? Will we enter into a phase of Operation Wetback? And that remains to be seen.
So right now there are around 700,000 people that currently have this kind of protection. If it were to end, the overwhelming majority of them would not be deported because deportation from a government standpoint is really hard and expensive and time consuming to accomplish. So it would be easier to identify and find them because they've given us their deeds, but then we'd have to detain them, and we don't have enough space to keep people in place while they receive due process. And then we also have to transport them to other countries. So logistically, it's a gigantic task, and we just don't have time to do that. Right? Earlier I mentioned that there are currently around 12 million people here as undocumented immigrants. That number remains about the same because even if people who oppose this sort of thing wanted to snap their fingers and get rid of everybody tomorrow, we can't do it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so what about the people that are sick and don't have like much time to like go back?
That's a really good question. So remember though, DACA is like age specific, right? So like, if you are, DACA was, you had to have been here before 16, but you also had to be 30 years or younger. So now we're talking about the instances, and they do exist, don't get me wrong, where a young or relatively young person is sick and diseased, right? I don't have a really good answer for that because no one's really asked that question. What I would say though is, if someone is clearly an illegal immigrant, economically, how can they afford, or can they afford the care, right? And then will that essentially be considered? Because here's the potential. The thought is, well, you're getting hospital care, you really can't afford the care, you're utilizing Americans' resources, and you're here illegally. Then that essentially can be problematic. This goes back to, again, we don't know realistically how the deportations are going to be carried out. But how you deport people is important, right? Because it's one way of doing it in a way that may be humane, even though some will question, can you ever really call deportation humane? But on the flip side, you could also do it in a way where in that situation, if like you're sick, and we're like, we don't care, you're essentially going to die anyways, we're gonna send you back to whatever country you come from. That's also potential as well. Now, I will say this too, there's a really interesting article, long article, about the fact that there have been many instances where immigrants have told ICE agents, if you send me back, I'm going to die. I have a violent, one incident that comes to mind is, there was a young lady, she says, the father of my child is extremely violent, he's threatened to kill me, here is evidence in my phone, he's threatened to kill me, and she was still sent back to Mexico, and she was murdered. So you saying that my life is in peril does not necessarily mean you're going to be protected. And that's a reality.
Yeah, it seems to be tied to the president in office and the policies advanced by that president, right? So what Obama said was that we've got a lot of people here without proper documentation. We're going to prioritize who should stay and who should go. And violent criminals were primarily targeted. So that way, we focused our deportation efforts on people that we perceived as threats to all of us. Right now, we might not have that kind of policy. So with the DACA folks, they've given us strong evidence. They've been vetted to show that they're not threats. But if we change our priorities, we might, instead of prioritizing threats, we might prioritize ease of acquisition, right? Whom can we catch fast? Who can we get our hands on to remove? And so a different policy could change things.
I think someone else had their hand up. Okay. Yes. I'll start with Caitlin and Jeff.
Okay, so why is it that the time frame is so limited? So you have to be under 30, but you have to be here before 16. And why is it that there are more females in the DACA program than there are males?
So this is a really interesting question, right? So one, it's rooted in the fact that it's an education component. Remember what DACA is a result of? The DACA is a result of the DREAM Act not being passed. And think about the E represents education, right? So there's an educational component, as well as the component of you have to be young. Like the idea is we're not going to penalize you for what your parents did. If you are older, however, then that's different. The thought is that you came here legally, you should have known better. So that's kind of really what it's rooted in. As far as why there are more females, remember, DACA is more about also applications, right? Like people choosing to apply. Also, you have to remember that females are educated much more than males are as far as going to college, and that might be a factor as well.
We can really only guess as to why. We do know some evidence about, because DACA has already taken place, how it's unfolding, and it's been really good for girls. It's been good for guys too. Students are way more likely to graduate from high school. They're also more likely to be accepted into college, and teenage births have gone down 45%. So the DACA participants are benefiting in lots of ways.
Jeff?
When Congress makes a decision, and if they choose to end DACA, is there something else that they have ready to replace it, or is just, is there something to replace it? Do they have a plan afterwards to replace it?
So here's the thing. In short, no, not really. Remember that DACA was an executive order by Obama. The thing that makes executive orders very tenuous is that the next president can therefore remove the executive order of the previous president. So now if Trump were to decide to officially, which he technically did as far as saying, and like it was pointed out, it's still in the court, so it's an issue, right? But technically he said, I'm ending DACA. I'm giving Congress an opportunity to enact a law to address this. If Congress does not enact a law, what he did not provide is a replacement to DACA. Like, what will be his own solution to it, right? Is it impossible for him to do that? No, but do we have anything concrete as of yet? We don't.
Yeah, there are a handful of different potential replacements. None of them have been officially selected. They've not been passed through Congress, but there are a couple Democrats and Republicans who have worked together to put together something almost identical to the DREAM Act. A couple of other Democrats and Republicans have worked together to bring something that pretty much just extends DACA. Other folks in Congress have said, well, let's make a deal. This goes to some of Trump's quotes, like, we'll give you $25 billion for the wall, all you gotta do is preserve the protections in place for DACA. So there are a lot of possible plans in place, but none of them have been anywhere close to finalized, or even emerged as like the #1 most likely contender.
One more question. Cam.
What happens to our economy and everything that taxpayers are doing, like say DACA?
So let's look at it from a basic perspective. DACA, the thing that makes DACA really interesting is the educational piece. So what we're talking about potentially is removing potential college graduates. So where we typically have a stereotypical, not we as in me or you, but like people have a stereotypical view of immigrants, in particular Mexican immigrants, the thing of migrant workers, what DACA says essentially is this is specifically for people who have educational aspirations or militaristic aspirations, right? So if you take away people who are going to have potentially careers more than a job, you're actually taking away people who could add to the economy, right? In just about every way that many nonpartisan entities have looked at it, removing immigrants really is actually problematic economically. In particular also, if you make an immigrant illegal or do not give them a path towards legal citizenship, what you're also doing is you're not encouraging them to be taxpayers, right? Because the notion is if I'm an illegal immigrant, and some illegal immigrants actually do pay taxes, but if I'm an illegal immigrant and I don't want to be known, I don't want to be found out, then I may not want to pay taxes. Not paying taxes also is never really good for the economy as well. So yes, there will be economic ramifications based upon a lot of studies that are out there that suggest removal or massive removal of immigrants too. That's another thing too. So let's say if you remove just some immigrants, it's few, right? Then it becomes a matter of question of whether or not there will be economic impact and how minimal that may be. But when we're talking about potentially massive removal of immigrants, that shapes a whole lot of things. Not only does it shape something from the basic labor perspective, but it also can definitely have an impact on markets as well. Because here's what we do know. We know that when labor costs are down for an entity, their profit margin increases. When their profit margin increases, investors feel more bold about that particular company. If you were to remove them, that would definitely impact, let's say, the orange groves, right? It would impact the watermelon fields as well. In the midst of other fields where minority groups, immigrant groups typically are the ones, and that's not just Mexicans, also Haitians as well, Jamaicans as well, like other groups are working in these particular fields that could definitely have an impact on the market overall. So we haven't found a study, I haven't, that's an honest objective study that's like less immigrants is better for the economy, right? So that has to be considered.
Yeah, the economic benefits or costs are really clear, right? So we've got hundreds of thousands of people right now who are able to make more money and spend more money. If DACA were to end, they'd be making less money and spending less money. If we're looking purely at economic results today, right now, one side of this debate is a lot stronger. Because we as a nation are benefiting economically and when it comes to taxation and government spending as well.
So I got that. It was more of with the process of deporting all these people.
Oh, okay, I get it. So now we're talking about government spending.
Yeah.
Okay, so now with government spending, one of the things that has to be understood is that we are in America are in trillions of dollars of debt. And we recently, a tax cut was presented that some have suggested would also cost the government additional $1.5 trillion, right? One of the things that's very interesting to look at, statistically speaking, is Republicans are often recognized as fiscally responsible or conservative, like that's the rap. But Republican presidents often actually spend a whole lot more in regards to government spending, but on various things, right? So for example, when you say, let's increase the military budget, that's increased government spending, right? When you say, let us deport more people, that is also increased government spending. So if we're going to increase border representation as far as the military, as well as ICE agents as well, increasing hiring is that, and as well as transport a lot more, it is going to cost the government a lot more money, and that will have an impact on the national debt. Does that make sense? Okay.
My guess though would be it would be negative there too, because let's imagine that we were to hire 10,000 more ICE agents to round up and remove 700,000 people. The lost wages and spending from 700,000 is likely to be greater than the wages earned by the 10,000 new jobs.
So I know you gotta go to the next class. See, it's funny, I was like, your questions, y'all didn't raise your hand, and then you had like 3,000 questions. Hopefully you learned a lot. I feel that you have, I know I have, in doing research and also learning always from my colleague here. Here's what I want you to realize though, and I'm just going to say two things and I will let you go on your way. One, remember on Facebook, you have a situation where Broward College South Campus, at BC South Campus, go on that, comment, make your comments known. How do you feel about DACA? Make sure you put hashtag BC DACA. You can also do the same thing on Instagram as well. They have an Instagram platform. Many of you may not know, but South Campus really has like a lot of social media representation on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, so follow them, follow your campus, and then make those comments. I will also say this. I'm imagining that you all feel a certain way about it. Many of the students in this school are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. If you want to do something about it, vote. You all have a wonderful day. Take care. Also, really quickly, in Building 66, 139, that's where I'm heading to next. I'll be showing the last speech of Martin Luther King Jr. Today, again, is his 50th anniversary of his death. Feel free to join my class and other people who will be there. Check out their speech and we'll dialogue about King's legacy. You all take care.